Okay. All right. Well, it looks like we have a few people in here, about 12 attendees so far. Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Alsup. I am the Vice President of Research and Development here at Regrid. We're dealing with a few technical issues with a couple of our guests here from the Michigan Geological Survey's Triage project. I know John, you all can see John and we can hear John, but John can't hear us. So he's working on trying to be able to hear us. And then we have another guest, Matthew Bell, who's working on getting his camera and microphone started. But in the meantime, we are here with Evie Murgia. Evie, do you want to give a brief introduction of yourself, and then I can sort of go into some of the background here?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Evie Murgia, and I am a hydrogeologist and project manager at the Michigan Geological Survey. I've been here for about 3 years, and most of that time I've spent managing the Triage project, which is what we're going to be talking about today.
Thank you. And thank you so much for being here. And I hope that John and Matthew get the tech issues sorted out and are able to join us here as well. So as they work on getting their microphones and video up and running, I wanted to start off with an introduction and thank you for everyone joining this Regrid webinar with the Michigan Geological Survey's Triage project at Western Michigan University. So just a quick sort of run of show here. I want to give everybody a little bit of background on Regrid, as well as our Data with Purpose program, which the Triage project is a partner of. And then I'm going to introduce the Triage project and have the team tell you a bit about themselves and their work. And then we'll just have a conversation with the Triage project team and hear more about how their work led them to the Data with Purpose program from Regrid. And of course, if there are any questions from the audience, feel free to put those in the chat, and we can get to questions at the end. And just while I see John over there, John, are you able to hear us yet? It looks like not yet. He's still working on it. We can hear you, John, but you can't hear us. But you're with us, and we will be here for you when things work, hopefully. All right. So first off, for anyone who isn't familiar, let me introduce Regrid. Regrid is a provider of national land parcel data. We collect, maintain, and license data, including the property boundaries of more than 99% of U.S. property and the underlying assessment data associated with those parcels. That includes data like property ownership, property use descriptions, tax bill mailing address, U.S. Postal Service vacancy data, property tax assessment values, and more. We started our work more than a decade ago in an environment where parcel data nationally was very difficult to work with, if you could even find it. But it's an absolutely fundamental ingredient for understanding the world of property around us and understanding the land we all live on and how it's used. So we've come a long way from those early days, but we know that parcel data is still often inaccessible to many of the organizations who need it most. Nonprofits working on issues like conservation, climate change, and housing, academics and researchers and universities, community organizations, and even government itself often need but can't afford to pay for or find parcel data at the statewide or nationwide level. And so that's why Regrid started its Data with Purpose program, which I've had the pleasure of leading for the last 6 months or so. Through Data with Purpose, we offer Regrid's national parcel boundaries and data to nonprofits and other use cases on a pay-what-you-can basis. Anyone can apply online at regrid.com/purpose. We'll review your application, reach out to talk about your needs, and figure out a way to get you what you need as quickly as we can. And that's how I was introduced to our guests today from the Michigan Geological Survey's Triage project, was an application to Regrid's Data with Purpose program. And so as a bit of background on the Triage project, as I've come to know them, as someone who both lives in Michigan and drinks water, the Triage project's work was immediately interesting to me, and I felt a sense of urgency to help them get the parcel data that they requested and needed to do their work. For attendees who may not know, Michigan has a significant issue with PFAS contamination. And when authorities need to evaluate PFAS contamination concerns and understand water wells that may be affected, they turn to the state's Wellogic database. And what the Michigan Geological Survey found when they took on the job of validating the data in that database is that 40% of the well location data was inaccurate, and hundreds of thousands of well records had not been digitized. So it was next to impossible to understand which wells were in fact affected when PFAS or other contamination concerns arose. And so those findings led to the grant-funded Triage project at the Michigan Geological Survey. The goal of the small team behind the Triage project is to validate and enhance the existing Wellogic water well database, and more accurate and reliable well water location data in turn produces more accurate and reliable hydrogeological maps for all other state programs and better informed responses to PFAS contamination. And so when the Triage project applied to Regrid's Data with Purpose program, we just launched our Esri compatible feature service, and the Triage project was excited to make use of it to support their work. They quickly became one of the first clients using the feature service. And today, it sounds like the important work of validating well location data is going much faster and much more smoothly for the Triage project. And as they told me in a Q&A that we did recently, and this is quoting from their response, previously we had to manually and visually assess the plotted location of each individual well point in a database of hundreds of thousands of wells. Now we are able to process up to 60% of a given county's well data using a Michigan Geological Survey developed ArcPython script, which depends on Regrid data and the provided feature service. The script drastically increased productivity. So with that, John, any progress? Are you able to hear us yet? I see Matthew there. Fantastic.
You made it.
Wonderful. All right. Well, with that, I want to hand off introductions to the team from the Triage project. Say thank you again for being here. Thank you for being a Data with Purpose partner, and thank you most of all for your work. So, Evie, I know you introduced yourself at the start here, but maybe one more time for anybody else who's joined late, and then we can go around to Matthew and we can see if John's able to hear us and speak with us yet.
Well, sure thing. And thank you for that introduction, Alex. We're definitely happy to be here. And we're mighty glad that you read our application and had that sense of urgency, as is something we've been working on for a few years and trying to build upon. And as we're going to get into here, Regrid has really made a huge difference in what we're able to do in terms of productivity and accuracy. And it's been great to see that kind of growth. We started originally with 6 members on the team, physically opening each well point and plotting that and seeing where it compared with property lines if we could get property data for a certain area. And that's how we originally stumbled across Regrid, was just trying to find different resources. And so we had everyone on the team sign up for an individual account, and things kind of developed from there. I think, we'll elaborate on that in a bit here. But for everyone who's just joined recently, my name is Murgia. I've been managing the Triage project for the last few years. And I'm excited to talk about how Regrid has been able to change things pretty drastically in the last few months for us.
Thank you very much. Matthew, we'll hand off to you.
Sweet. Can you guys hear me okay? Just want to make sure of that. Okay, cool.
Perfect.
So my name is Matt Bell. I take care of all the mapping efforts. Recently been handing over a few of those responsibilities, but I was the first person to develop our web application for the Triage team, and really utilizing a lot of what Regrid has been doing, collecting parcel data, and being able to, again, emphasize that point of just like collecting information about the location, because we couldn't do what we do without knowing where all the wells are located. So having this service, having the ability to be able to add in those locations, be able to validate whether a well is placed correctly is really crucially important. And so it's really a privilege to be on here today. And yeah, that's about all I have.
Well, thank you. We're so glad to have you. John, any progress over there? Can you hear me? No. All right. We will come back to John. Hopefully we get that working. But yeah, I just wanted to sort of go from here into discussion and help folks understand a bit more about the work that the Triage project does. I didn't know about your work until you applied for Data with Purpose, and then I kind of couldn't believe that I hadn't heard about it previously. So maybe we just start there. Could you tell us about the Michigan Geological Survey's Triage project? I gave a bit of crude history, but we'd love to hear a little bit more about where it comes from from you all.
Well, I think you summed it up pretty well there, Alex. This stemmed originally from early PFAS contamination concerns where we would go, not necessarily we, but the state at large would go out to particular locations, having referenced the Wellogic database, saying we need to test here or here. Come to find out that well's not at all where it was supposed to be. And so, that was one of the main things that kind of kicked off, well, we should probably look back at this again and see, where the difference is coming from. And as Matt said, the location is among the most important. Oftentimes, if we don't have an accurate location on a well point, all of the rest of the data is not useful to us because we don't want to put it in there if it's not going to be in the right placement, because that could throw off every other node around it. And so part of that was that physical testing. And then the other part is that this isn't the applications of this is not necessarily limited to PFAS review, is that this is the well database that is used across the state by everyone who needs access to well data. So that's, of course, EGLE, formerly Michigan Department of Environmental Quality, several departments within there, local environmental consulting firms, local county health departments, the drillers themselves, the list goes on. So everyone that has access to this information, this is setting the foundation for everything moving forward on top of that. And it is hundreds of thousands of well points that we're looking at.
Thank you very much for that. And I want to pause because I saw a eureka moment there from John. It looks like you're with us.
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, before we go on, I'd love to pass the mic over to you, John, to introduce yourself, and then we can sort of move on from there. And we'd love to ask some questions of you as well, of course.
Well, I appreciate it very much, Jeff. I couldn't believe it. It was one button that I hadn't clicked and all the clicking I was doing. Anyway, bottom line is I'm there. So anyway, I'm John Yellich. I'm the director of the Michigan Geologic Survey. I've been here since 2013, and we have been a one-man show. I've been the only person here working at the survey until this year when we now have funding. Everybody has been contract. We have a number of students, as we're talking about here, have worked on different projects, but this particular project, and I apologize if I repeat, this started in 2018 when I had proposed some work with the MPART, which is a Michigan PFAS action response team. And we had proposed to do a mini project for them. And we found out that their wells were not in the right location and we couldn't predict which way the groundwater was flowing. And we did those in June and August. And that was when they went back inside and said that we need to do something about the wells. So anyway, that's a brief summary of how we got there. And then we started hiring people and training them and so forth. But as Evie has just pointed out, this data is used by everybody because it's the only active database we have today. We are working on other ones right now, but it's the only one. And the data goes all the way back to the 30s, 40s, and 50s that we're putting into the system. So we have a lot of historical data that we're putting in. And if you already said it, Evie, I apologize. It's about 1.3 million data points that we're putting into the system. So that's about it. I'll listen to everybody else now.
That's great. Thank you so much. I'm really glad that this is working for you now, John. Yeah, so as you both alluded to, I would love to hear, and for the attendees as well, some of the other use cases that people might not be familiar with, might not be aware of, that that folks rely on this database for.
Well, I will say that, one of the overarching applications of this is that it is a foundation for almost any project that deals with our water resources here in Michigan. As most of us in attendance are well aware, any model, any map that we put together can only be as good as the data that goes into it. So there's a lot of benefits of us working with Regrid in that regard. A couple that are probably more familiar to the general public would be one, working, and this again is what I mentioned, that it's not exclusive to PFAS applications, but that would be with the dam failure, Sycamore Dam failure in Gladwin County. And so, as a part of the response to that, we were validating the water well data and putting together a number of hydrogeologic map products so that they could better understand this drastic change in water level, which then left a lot of people without access to water because they had what we refer to as sandpoint wells, essentially just shallow wells where they were shallow enough that the water level dropped below those. And we looked at that, and with this database that we have being historic, and we've been entering these data points and validating them, we could look back in 5-year increments so that we could get a better understanding of long-term, what should we expect naturally in variations of the static water level. And so with that, we were able to kind of help build this plan of what's going to happen next, what can we expect as they start to rebuild things. And this especially came in handy with people who no longer had functioning wells and needed new wells because they had to apply for assistance, monetary assistance to drill new wells so that they could have access to water at these homes. Come to find out, a lot of them didn't even realize that the wells that had been drilled were not meeting state standards that we had in the past. John and Matt both worked directly on that project as well. Did you guys have something to add with that one?
Well, I guess one of the keys that came out of this perhaps was the fact that the water table was so high in that area, they could have a landscaper come in and put a sand point in. And that's what a lot of people did. And it wasn't a permitted well. And so when the wells went dry, when the dam failure occurred, they applied for monetary assistance from FEMA. And that's when we found out that over half of the wells that went dry weren't permitted because they just had somebody put them in, built the house, and there was adequate water because there was a good sand zone up there and they could go ahead and do it. That's probably the reality of what happened to a lot of this. And so they ended up having to permit a well and pay for it themselves because the water table had dropped. But I think that the other thing that it showed is that we had the ability to put the data together quickly. We could go ahead and do what we call cross sections, which is 3D, looking at everything in the subsurface and try and identify where the water table was not dropping as much or it had not dropped at all. And that's what we were able to do by having all the data together. And that's kind of what we do when we use this data. It's our preliminary assessment of where's the water table and what kind of geologic units do we have in the subsurface that we can put. And that's where that becomes the primer for landfills. When they put a landfill in, they still have to put monitor wells. And so it gives them an idea, is this an area that we should put a landfill? Is it clay or is it all sand? You don't want to put a landfill on top of sand. So this is part of our mapping program, but it takes this basic information now, puts it together so that people can use it to make decisions. And that's how we really do it. And that's how the other departments in the state, as well as the consulting firms that are out there, that it's their first step of getting data so that they can go ahead and say, this is where we want to do something.
Thank you very much for that. Matthew, anything that you want to add there?
I think also something that we were also noticing, especially with Gladwin, in response to the panic of just everybody losing water, I think we saw a dramatic increase in people installing water wells, which those also were also very incorrect, some being almost 2 miles away from where they should be. And so really looking at the newest ones as well as the old ones in terms of looking at locations, validating the information, even like the newest ones still need to be validated. The newest wells still need to be looked at. And so adding new context into that of just like, we still have an issue of this, like we still have more work to do.
And as you started this work, what problem did you encounter that led you to apply for data with purpose? Could you tell us a little bit about what you were doing sort of before the Regrid, the Esri compatible feature service from Regrid, entered your sort of workflow?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, previously when we were looking at the plotting of those individual lat longs compared to parcel boundaries wherever we could get them, and a lot of times that was the county GIS department, if they provided one. That's a big if. And then after that, it's a question of quality. The different counties have different resources, so they have different quality of parcel viewers. They might also not all offer them through the same platform, so they're going to look different. And while they operate on the same basic functionality, that's then something new that the person who's reviewing it has to learn and get used to, especially if we're working in a particular area that might be at the junction of 4 different counties, and they're going to have to switch back and forth between all of those within the data set that they're looking at, which is in turn going to slow things down in that review. And with a lot of these responses, we're trying to get that turned out as quickly as possible, so it becomes an added difficulty in time management. And so before we were looking first at the county ones, assuming that those were going to be the most complete if they had it. And sometimes they were, and sometimes they weren't. Then we would look at other services like Fetch GIS. Then we'd even go to like Zillow or other real estate websites. Bing Maps has always been like an extra supplemental one for us. And then Google Earth for just seeing a different imagery, especially if the ones we're looking at with the parcel viewer were taken during warmer season where we have more tree coverage and we can't necessarily see the building footprints. So it's a lot of switching back and forth. And even then, any data that we could download is then not uniform. So we have to tediously go in for these mapping efforts and edit individual fields so that it can meet the criteria for our tools to build these cross sections and groundwater flow maps. So it was a little bit more chaotic, and what Regrid allowed us to do when we found that, it, of course, being a nationwide service, we can look just at Michigan or any particular county, and everything's going to be uniform. There might be some slight variations, but it's the same setup, which makes things a lot easier for us in that we can just stay with one application. And that's what we started with, is we said, everybody, this is what we're going to start using now. It's going to be our main one so that we don't have to relearn different ones. Everybody sign up for an individual account. And then we realized, well, we're going to need to download this data, but we didn't actually have room specified in the budget for that. So our director was paying out of pocket for the monthly base level that you guys offer so that we could download up to a certain amount. Of course, we still had that limitation to work with. So in trying to build our own parcel viewer application and integrate that parcel data with the well data so that we can make it even more efficient, we were limited in what we could do with that. And so Matt, I think, was just perusing the Regrid website and came across Data with a Purpose and said, hey, do you think we could apply for this? And I said, yeah, I think we've got a fair shot. Let's go ahead and try for it. And here we are today.
But if I can add that it actually started off with a young student that we had that went to work for a Miss Dig company. And he had said, hey, they've got this great software. And so between Matt and the others, they looked at it and said, yes, it was. And that's when we paid the first tranche of, not big money, but the first tranche to get it. And we tried it and found out that it works so well because Miss Dig, of course, is the ones that are out there doing the searches for all your utilities, buried utilities and everything. And they needed to know where everything was. And so when we saw how much utility it had for what we were doing, that's when they realized that this is something we need to do. So it was just because we had one of the students that went to work and said, hey, this is a great program. And he had been working for us already for almost a year and said, this works better than the other stuff. And we said, okay.
Well, that's great. I'm so glad that it worked out. Yeah, please, Matthew, go ahead.
Yeah, and to add to that too, the fact that we could be able to download this sort of information and like be able to use it for our other projects that we had going on, being able to streamline using Python scripts, how to locate wells, that expedited what possibilities we could use for locating information. So really, it was like a catch-all sort of thing of like it helped our employees being able to locate all the information in a manual review, but also helped us to add more automation into the picture as well.
That's great. Perfect segue. Yeah, I was just going to ask, could you talk a little bit about that ArcPython script and the automation that you were able to achieve using the feature service and sort of the before and after effects of what you were doing previously and what that was able to expedite for you.
So us being able to build this ArcPython script has arguably been the most notable change for us in terms of procedure and productivity because of our partnership now with Regrid, is that in part that uniformity of the data has allowed us to build this code in ArcPython that effectively combs out what's good already. So before, we would go through each individual well point and look at where it plotted and say, yep, if that one right off the bat, we can see it falls within the parcel lines for that house and there's an address match. Yep, that's good. We'll move on. And there's quite a few of those because we have 36 to 40% average error with well locations when reviewing this. So that means that all the other chunk of it, wherever that range falls, those are fine. So we'd still have to look at those in the manual review process. But now because of our ArcPython script, we can essentially comb out all of the good ones, asking the question at the very base of this, does it fall within the parcel boundaries for the associated address, which we were not able to do with any data sets that we had prior. And then beyond that, there's some other things that Regrid kind of offered that made us able to refine that process and add in additional if-then so that we can further the amount of good wells that we can comb out. That way we're just manually reviewing the more problematic ones. And we can automate more of the procedure and save more time. Because before when we have people reviewing these manually, they could review at a good rate 40 wells in an hour. Whether it's this code, 200 in a couple minutes, couple thousand in 5 minutes or so, depending on what's going on with that particular county. And so that radically changes what we're able to get done with that. A couple other things that were useful were land use codes. So that allowed us to kind of add in some things in terms of irrigation wells. For most of these, they're household wells. And so we work with a 200-foot accuracy radius, meaning if we don't have a good line of evidence saying, yeah, it's with where I'm placing this is 200 feet away from that house, essentially, we're not going to place it. We're not going to say that we validated that because we're only going to work within that accuracy radius. Now with irrigation wells, it's a little bit harder to say because those are off irrigation properties, or agricultural properties are often much larger than household properties. So it's harder to say if it's going to be on the southwest corner of the property or right smack in the middle. So when we look at land use codes, that we can integrate that with the Python script to say, yes, this is an irrigation well, or maybe it was mismarked. So it's another way of flagging and kind of organizing what we need to be dealing with, which is another way of expediting our procedures.
That's great. And you're referring there to the LBCS land use codes, is that right? Yeah,
and then source information has proven useful as well.
Yes,
which is not necessarily something we were planning on in the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Those for anyone attending who doesn't know, the LBCS land use codes are a framework for I'll try to do my best describing this, a qualitative description of what's happening on any parcel. It was developed by the American Planning Association, I think in the 90s, early 90s. And Regrid has been populating, they created the framework, the APA created the framework, but didn't actually populate the framework with any parcel level data. And so we've been using assessment data that we collect at the local level. We've been populating those LBCS land use codes across the country because they're a really interesting multidimensional description of what is qualitatively happening on a parcel. So it's always exciting to hear about how they are being used and value that people are getting out of them. So yeah, that's great to hear. One of the other questions I had: do other states have similar projects like this, and do you coordinate with? And if so, do you coordinate with them in any way? I'm just curious. I imagine our groundwater doesn't abide by state boundaries. I'm just wondering how state to state coordination may work.
If I can, I just talk a little bit about Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois, is that most of them have checks on their wells when they're put into the system. And so that's what they've been doing, because then the data goes on to the geology group or something else within the geologic survey. right now, we're just trying to automate this right now to get all of this historic data, which hasn't been put into a database, make it accurate. And so, candidly, I've been flaunting this with Ohio and with Indiana and Illinois about our ability to go ahead and locate faster. So I'm hoping at some juncture here is that they'll be reaching out to you, because I just met with the 8 geologists from the Great Lakes states area, and that's New York, Pennsylvania, all the way around Wisconsin, Minnesota, and talked to them about the fact of what we're doing. So I'm hoping that it helps to generate some interest.
That's wonderful to hear. Of course, anybody in this work, we'd love to hear from them in Data with Purpose. That'd be great. Just wondering if you could share sort of where do you see this going from here? What's next for the Triage project, and given that you can sort of move through this validation work faster, sort of what comes next, and what might some of the sort of downstream benefits be?
Well, that's a good question, because I'll add something in on with working with other states, is that uniformity of the data becomes one of our greatest strengths. So as we go on in time and our water resources become more of a prevalent issue, we're going to see more and more disputes about who can pump how much water are used for what across state lines. So if we have uniform data use with other Midwestern states, especially as everyone starts to look at us for being the freshwater, the Great Lakes state, then we can respond to those kinds of concerns much faster having that uniform data. So if we were all on the same page with this and had the same or at least similar procedures for validating the data and hosting those databases, then that allows us to put together all of these products that we need to be able to understand whatever questions it is that we're asking. In any remediation case, among the first questions that are going to be asked is, where is it and where is it going? And so if you can't answer those questions well enough, every step after that is going to become more difficult to address. So the Triage project is essentially setting a foundation to be able to answer those questions well, and others. There's a whole lot of other applications. And so while the Triage project's main job is effectively playing cleanup crew with the database that exists currently and building that up and digitizing everything that has yet to be digitized, people are going to continue to contribute to our database, even as we, and Eagle's working right now on having a new version of this, essentially, is that as we go on, we're still going to be using this data. It's that it's going to go on to all of these other areas. And one thing that we're hoping to do is kind of use similar code built off of the ArcPython script that we put together to have a pre-check on any new data that's being entered, because it's always going to be contributed to by different parties. It's not going to be just MGS. So we can't confirm that everyone else is following the exact same validation procedures as us. So if we just put that into the tool to where people are forced to use it as they enter in the data, then that kind of reduces the room for human error.
Thank you for that. Before opening it up and seeing if there are any questions from the folks watching here, just wanted to ask, is there anything else that you all wanted to mention? I'm happy to give the floor to you if there's anything else that you wanted to share or mention about the work of the Triage project in this space.
Well, I will say that one other thing that we're working on is expanding our education and outreach efforts so that we can share more of what we're doing. Like you said, you had no idea that this is anything that was happening before, and you were surprised about that. And so you're not the only person to make that kind of comment. So we've been putting some more efforts into outreach as of late. And one of the main ways that we're doing that is through our YouTube channel. And so I would encourage everyone to check that out if they're interested in learning more about our ongoings and what the survey has done in the past and plans to do in the future, as well as just some nice education resources like Michigan Geology, how groundwater works. Maybe if you're listening in on this and you're thinking, well, a lot of that didn't make sense to me, but I would like to learn about it. That's one way that we have that. And it's been such a pleasure working with Regrid. I think that you guys can't know how much this helps because we can't see right now how much this will help going on to the future because there's so many different applications for it. And so I want to say thank you to you all for everything that you've done. This has been incredibly helpful to our project, but everyone else who uses this database as well. So it's by far not limited to the survey's use. And we're really looking forward to being able to access Batch API, because once you guys have that together, we'll be able to process out even more of those good wells on the front end. And depending on how erroneous the data set coming in is, we can take care of a front end 70 to 80% of the good wells, because most of what that comes down to as an issue is the address being misspelled, or north being at the front end versus back end, or house numbers being switched. So we can use the API to get that closest match and have a workaround there.
Yes.
I'd like to add,
thank you so much for that, by the way.
yes. I'd like to add just a couple of things to this, which is that the triage project was one that the state needed to have, and MGS was able to show what we could do. But I use this analogy, if you will, is that we started off as if we were riding a 3-wheel bike, and we had to make it work. And so we had all these meetings and everything else figuring out how to do it. And there were all these fences, if you will, with the parcels, and we were finding different software to do it. And then all of a sudden, as the project merged in this contact, as we talked about with Miss Dig, and showing what it could do, and then having the people on board that could do it, it all of a sudden turned into not a 3-wheel bike, but a racing bike. And so we are now able to do it effectively. But the other piece that's important about this is that the triage project has allowed us to do other things. We've probably had, I don't know, it's 45 or 50 students that have been working through this, and we have somewhere between 25 and 30 on board right now. But the point is that we were able to teach them other skills, and the other skills are not just this, but also ArcGIS, because ArcGIS is a method that geologists use for putting data together. And we have a number of them that had learned that as a skill, so it's going to make them more employable when they're out there. So they're doing these other things that you may think is just data entry and other things, but they're learning some other skills, and then learning from their other, if you will, colleagues. And so students are teaching students and what to do. And so from my perspective, as a person who's been in industry and business for a long time, having students teach, they have different ways of doing it than I did. You just saw how long it took me just to get my speakers working. And so that was terrible. But anyway, the whole point is that they find a better way to do it, a faster way to do it. And so what the programs allowed us to do is both educate the students to get better at what they're doing, but also to make the program better, as Evie has talked about, so that it'd be more efficient for the state.
And I would say we've probably had closer to 70 students
All right,
pass through in the last few years. Yeah.
And a lot of them are working in good jobs right now, and they're using
They
some
are
of the skills
probably still using Regrid too in their other applications.
Well, that's great. That's wonderful. And yes, the YouTube channel is great, and that's where I wound up after hearing about you all for the first time, and spent a bunch of time watching videos there. It was really nice. So yeah, thank you again for those comments, and so glad that you made your way to us, and we've been able to help you in your important work. If there are any questions from the attendees, happy to take a couple of those if anybody has anything they want to put into the chat. If not, no problem. But I wanted to say thank you again to the Triage project team for being here today. Thank you for your time. And thank you again for your work. I will continue to live in Michigan and continue to drink water, and be glad to know that you all are out there doing your work.
Well, thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Great to have you all. All right. It looks like I don't see any questions in the chat, so I think we can wrap it up there. Thank you everybody for being here. Great to see you all. Talk soon, and drive safe if you're in Michigan in the snow right now.
Oh, definitely. Bye,
Take
everyone.
Care.
Bye.
Bye.